Hi, welcome to Kate's Kitchen. I'm Kate, and today we're going to can tomato sauce. It's canning season, folks. Step 1 is to soak your tomatoes in vinegar water and then rinse them real well. Step 2 is to take your tomatoes, turn them to the blossom end side, and make a slight cross cut in order to break the skin. Then you put them in the hot boiling water and you leave them there until the skin begins to peel back. Once that has happened, you bring them over and you put them in the ice water. Here, let's see the skin has started to peel back and it comes off very easily. If it doesn't, you can have a small paring knife close by and it will peel off the rest of it. Most of the time it comes off very easily. As I take the skin off, I put them in this bowl. All the skins that I've taken off tomatoes so far. Now most people throw those away. I don't. I save them because I'm going to make a tomato powder. I'm going to dehydrate them, put them in my coffee grinder and grind them up and save them. They make excellent way to add extra tomato to meatloaf or tomato soup or anything that you're using tomatoes in. From there, we come over and we put them in a large stew pot. This stew pot is where I'm putting all of the tomatoes as I get them skinned. We're going to go through after that and we're going to cut out the stem end and we'll chop them up and then we're going to heat them on the stove. Our tomatoes are all cut up. They're in the crock pot along with one large onion, and I'll be back to check on it from time to time. Our crock pot is cooling down. The tomatoes that we put in it that filled it almost to the top have been cooking for a little over 20 hours. 5 hours at high and the remaining 15 on low. It's down to right about here. It's cooked way down. As soon as it's cool enough, I'm going to take my immersion blender, put it in there and make a puree out of it, and that will be our tomato sauce. In the meanwhile, I'm getting ready to get some tomatoes to go into the jars as diced tomatoes, not a sauce. They're not going to need to be cooked, but we are going to remove the skin. In order to remove the skin, we take a tomato, go at the opposite end, which is the blossom end, a nice knife, and cut a very thin X. This allows the hot water to get under there and loosen the skin. And we will drop the tomatoes one by one into boiling water. I've done several of them over here, so I'm just going to drop several of them in. And we will let them blanch in the boiling water for 3 or 4 minutes at the most. As they blanch, the water will get under the skin and we'll be able to see that it's loosening. On this bowl, I have some that I've already done that way. If you can get close enough or not, but I put the X on the bottom, put it in the water, and let it cook. And now, the skin is going to peel right off. And we put it in another bowl. We don't want to throw the skin away because we're going to dry that in the dehydrator and make tomato powder. But we go ahead and just peel the skin right off. And we set the tomato in the bowl right there. Let's do another one real quickly. The skin really comes off very easily once it's been in the water like that. The boiling water gets between the skin and the flesh, and it just slides right off. Now the reason we're just going to do this is because the tomatoes that we're going to put in as diced tomatoes will cook during the pressure canning process. And yes, we will pressure can this, even though it is tomatoes, and traditionally they say you don't have to pressure can tomatoes because they're high in acid. But we are going to pressure can them to be sure everything gets cooked. It looks like those other tomatoes are just about ready to come out, so let me show you what they look like. Oh, this, by the way, is a bowl filled with ice and a little bit of water. Let's see if we've got one that's ready to come out here. As you can see, the skin is peeling off all by itself. So we drop it in the cold water, which makes it easier to handle, and it also makes it easier to pull the skin off. Just like that. I'm going to continue with this bowl full of tomatoes. When that's all done, I'll bring you back and show you how we chop them up and slide them in the bottles. Our next step is we're taking our tomatoes that we peeled and we're cutting them up. Just all I do is I just take little slices out of them I just make a little slice and put it down in the measuring cup. Now when I have a bunch of them sliced, the next step is I come to my jar, which is what we're going to can them in. My jars were all washed in super hot soapy water, and then they were dried, but they are not hot because I'm putting room temperature food in it, and my canner is also room temperature. We're going to start everything in what they call cold. It takes a little longer, but it's much easier to deal with. I put as many pieces of the tomato in here as I can fit. And then I press it down to try and get out air. We don't want a whole lot of air in there. And I'm finding that it takes just about 3 tomatoes to fill one of these wide-mouth pint jars. As you can see, it's fairly close to being full. Now the next thing I will do is I will take my paper towel, dip it in some vinegar, and wipe the threads and the top of the jar. We want to be sure that no tomato juice or salt or lemon juice or anything else gets into the jar. Then I take my lid and my ring, put it on the jar, and tighten it down finger tight. That's all there is to it, and you set it down in the canner. Now the one thing I did not tell you all that I have done is I took my jars, I took the smallest measuring spoon I have, which is a 1/4 teaspoon. I put half of that of salt in each jar, and then I filled it and put lemon juice in each jar. So it has 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt and 1/4 of a teaspoon of lemon juice in each jar. That maintains the acidity of the tomatoes, and the salt brings out the flavor. So now let's go ahead and finish filling this one. This is kind of a messy process, y'all. You got to load it all by hand, and tomatoes just get drippy. So it gets to be a messy process. I would suggest you keep a couple of towels that you don't care what happens to them around, because tomatoes do stain. And even if you're wearing red, as I am, they will stain. If you have a nice apron, I would suggest that you not use that, but use an older one, because tomatoes will stain. Now we wipe the threads again. We put our lid and ring on and tighten it down and put it inside the water. And we'll continue cutting them up and filling the wide mouth jars until we've got 2 full. We've got 6 more to go, so I imagine that'll be 2 more jars. And then once we get that done, then we'll put a rack between them. Then we're going to get the immersion blender, because our other tomato sauce is now cool, and we'll use the immersion blender to blend it, and then we'll put it in jars along with some spices, and we'll can that at the same time, because it all cans at the same length of time and the same pressure. So I'll bring you back when I'm ready to do the blending on the others. We got our first 5 jars of tomatoes into the canner. Those are the ones that we just pulled the skin off and cut up and put in the canner. Now we're going to take the tomatoes that we cooked in the crock pot for so long. We're going to use our immersion blender, and we're going to puree this. It's noisy, I'm warning you now, but here we go. Okay, what was tomato in little tiny cooked down pieces is now a juice. You see, it's just blended and pureed down. So our next step is to get our small mouth jars, get them all ready with a little bit of lemon juice, a little bit of salt, and whatever spices we're going to put in it, and start filling it with this. One thing I will tell you is that some of this is going to be a spaghetti sauce. So I will use some of my homemade garlic powder and some of the Italian spices like rosemary and oregano and things like that I've also dehydrated and chopped up and have in the cabinet. I will bring you back when everything is ready to go and I've filled the jars. I'm now canning up my homemade spaghetti sauce. It is made from the tomatoes that we cooked. Into the jar with the tomato sauce is 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/2 of a teaspoon of lemon juice, and a whole teaspoon of Italian seasonings and garlic powder. Now we're going to fill each jar up to the first ring here. So one scoop up, and I always do this because I hate making messes. And since we're doing this cold, I'll just go ahead and fill all of the jars, and then we'll wipe the rims and put on the lids and the rings. This will be the last one, since we're getting down low in the bottom of the pot. I have to bend it over to get the little bit in the corners. There we go. Now, one thing I did on the other jars, but I forgot to show you, was we have to debubble. We have to remove the extra air bubbles. Now, on the last jars, it was not quite as important because the tomatoes will give up a lot of juice as they're cooking. But I did go back in and debubble just to be sure there was plenty of room. Next thing we do is remove the excess air bubbles, and while we're doing it, it will mix in the spices. Basically, I just want to be sure there are no bubbles left in it. You don't want to use a metal implement like a knife or something like that, because that will score up the inside of your jars and it'll make them not last quite so long. I always use, when I'm doing things like this, I always use plastic or wood. If I had a wood debubbler, I would use the wood, but I don't, so I'm using my plastic one. Now the next step is one y'all are very familiar with. You take a clean paper towel, dip it in a little vinegar, and we wipe around the rings, the threads of the jar, and the top. We want to be sure that everything is very clean. We don't want anything to get on there that could cause the seal to fail or that could get in and ruin what's inside. So we clean them very carefully. And I'm looking on the paper towel each time to be sure that there is nothing showing up. And as you can see, if something does show up, you know you got it all. Now the next thing we'll do is I'll go and get the lids and the rings, and we'll put those on, do them fingertip tight, and then put them down in our canner. Now this canner is going to be a 2-level because we don't have enough room to get 11 jars in the bottom. So I have a second rack, and I'll put one more in here. That'll make 6 on the bottom. I'll put the rack in and put another 5 in there. This is an All-American canner. It is a special kind of canner in that it does not have a rubber gasket that goes between the canner and the lid. This is what's called a metal-on-metal canner, meaning that this metal just slides down inside. Now, in order to make it so that you can get it out again, you have to put some kind of oil, and I use coconut oil or olive oil. Right now I'm using coconut. And you have to brush it all around where the metal touches the bottom or the canner. While I'm doing this, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the safety things that you need to remember when doing pressure canning. First thing you need to do is, if you have a canner that has a rubber gasket, you need to inspect your gasket and be sure that it is not frayed and not worn out at all. That is a very important safety issue. You want to be sure it's in good shape. If you have one like this that does not have that, you need to be sure to always put a layer of oil on the lid and on the canner itself where the two meet. It's important because if you don't do that, your canner lid can get stuck. The next thing you need to do is you need to hold your lid up to the light, look through the back, and see if you can see light coming through this. This is the little vent where the steam vents, getting rid of the extra air that's in there and getting the pressure building up in your canner. So we now have that all oiled. On this lid, there is a little arrow that is etched into the metal. And on the canner itself, there is a slot cut right here. And what you want to do when you put the lid on is you want to match up the slot and the arrow. When that matches up, your little locks here can go up and it'll hold. It also allows the little L-shaped bracket that is screwed to the lid to come underneath this portion of the canner, so the lid cannot come off. You have two different things holding it on, the L-shaped brackets and these screwed on holders. When you put them on, you do opposite sides together, two at a time. That way you're sure that the lid goes down evenly and straight, because you want everything to be as safe as possible. And this way you're sure that it goes on and keeps it straight and even. You want to try and get it just as tight as you can possibly get it. Screw it down tight, tight, tight so that it'll hold. And now your canner is ready to go. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn on the heat under the canner. And we're going to turn it on. My stove goes from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, the hottest. We're going to turn it on at about 7 and let it slowly heat up everything inside, because everything in there right now is room temperature. It's not hot. Once it gets up to about 7, once it's been up a while, I'm going to time it, and I'm going to check on it in 20 minutes. I'm going to check and see if there is steam coming out of here. If there is not, I'm going to turn it all the way up to 10, which is the highest to go, and I'm going to wait another 5 minutes and keep checking back at 5-minute intervals. Once that does start steaming, I will set my timer for 10 minutes. That allows the canner to evacuate the cold air that's in there and build up the steam. Then I will take this, which is a weighted gauge, and it's set up for 5, 10, or 15 pounds of pressure, and I'm going to set it right down on top like that. That will slow the air steaming out, or the steam coming out, and it'll start building up our pressure. And we'll watch this when it gets to 10. From my altitude, 10 pounds of pressure is what we'll use. So when it gets to 10, I'll back off the heat on the stove to around 7 again. I do enough of this canning that I know on my stove, 7, once it's up to pressure, will maintain pressure as long as it needs to. Once it has gone up there and maintained the pressure, and I've got it settled on 7, then I will set my timer again for 35 minutes, and that's when we will start processing. After the 35 minutes, we'll turn off the heat from the stove and walk away for 45 minutes to an hour and allow the pressure to go away and allow it to cool back down naturally. At that point, I'll bring you back. We'll take the gauge off, or the weight off. We'll take the lid off, and I'll show you the canned tomato sauce. And that is what we will put on our pantry shelves. The canner got up to pressure. We let it vent for 10 minutes. Then we put our little weight on. Let it come up to 10 pounds per square inch. And we let it cook for 35 minutes. At that point, we turn the heat back off. And it has now been an hour later. I've removed our locking mechanism. I've now taken the weight off, and we're going to open the canner. When you open the canner, you always want to open it away from your face, because you don't want that steam that will still be in there to get in your face and scald you. Now we'll see what happened. There is our tomato sauce, or our spaghetti sauce if you want to call it that. Now, because we didn't add any extra liquid, there isn't a lot of liquid in there, but there is a lot of tomato in there. Now, these are the parts that we just placed the tomatoes in there. No extra liquid, just what came out of the tomatoes. No spices or anything like that, except just a little tiny bit of salt. And as these cool, the pieces of tomato will spread back out again. And you'll get a little bit of floaty, but not a lot. there we are. These will have to cool. Most recipes say 24 hours. I say 12 to 24, depending. And sometime as it cools, these lids will all pop down. I like to cover them with a light cloth, and allows them to cool more slowly so that they don't cool down too quick and have a problem, break the glass or whatever. You saw what we got out of our tomatoes. All of those tomatoes were a gift to me. There were 5 grocery bags full of medium-sized tomatoes. Out of that 5 grocery bags, we got 3, 6, 9, 11 pints of tomato products to go on our shelves. I hope you try it. I hope you like it. Don't forget to subscribe if you are not subscribed, and like. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye.